Please welcome investor and co-founder of Homeaway, Carl Shepard, in conversation with Skift executive editor and founding editor, Dennis Schaal.
Carl, thanks for showing up, and let's uncover some stuff about this industry. So, was this beginner's luck? Co-founder of Homeaway, sold to Expedia for $3.9 billion. Board member of Turnkey, sold to Vacasa. Board member of Athleisure, bought by Oyo as the basis of its European vacation rental business. Board member of RV Share, sold to KKR this spring. What's going on, Carl?
I guess as people go onto boards and people just want to get rid of me, so they sell for high multiples. I guess that's really the string that comes through.
And I've always wanted to ask you this question. So you were co-founder of Homeaway. It might have been your biggest brand, or one of your biggest brands was VRBO, but now they call it Verbo. What do you think of that name?
Well, my standard answer, Dennis, is that they paid almost $4 billion so they can call it what they want. But the reality is Verbo is a very strong name. Some people call it VRBO. Some people, the older folks, still do. Interesting sidebar, the day I bought VRBO happened to be a back to school night. And I mentioned to a woman in the cafeteria at my elementary school at the time that I just bought VRBO, and she screamed. And she said, "Carl just bought VRBO." And women came running across the cafeteria room, and I felt like a rock star for the first time in my life, because people love that website. So I think naming it Verbo is a good idea.
Who knew? Carl, let's talk a little bit about SPAC. So another board that you're on is a SPAC formed by Retail Me Not founder Cotter Cunningham, your fellow co-founder Brian Sharples at Homeaway. It's called Moose Pond Acquisition Corp. I like the name. But are there any good candidates out there?
You know, I think that the SPAC game has gotten very, very crowded right now. And actually, Brian and I are about to have lunch in about an hour and talk a little bit more about it. My thoughts here right now is that a lot of SPACs that are in the pipeline are probably going to pull back. There are hundreds of billions of dollars tied up in SPACs right now chasing unicorns. There are, they're called unicorns for a reason. There aren't that many of them. So when you see things and valuations going like they've gone lately, especially in the travel industry, you realize that with that much money chasing so few opportunities, this might not be the best time to have a SPAC.
So it's kind of counterintuitive, because some people not in the investment community might think, oh, it's the pandemic, valuations must be low, but that's not the case.
It's not the case at all. I think that companies that have survived the pandemic, let's be honest, the vacation rental category, the short-term rental category, as it's called these days, was just perfectly positioned to grow during a pandemic. And the growth that came in the most traditional of markets, right? The drive-to markets. Because if you're a guy living in Berlin, you might not be able to get out of the country to go to Spain, but you can certainly drive to the coast of Germany on a nice day. You can do something like that. So short-term rentals during the pandemic grew exponentially. We did not all know that last March. I believe I was a part of many conversations in March of 2020 about we need to hunker down. At Turnkey, we identified how we were going to cut costs so that we could survive this pandemic. And then a month later, we came back and JB says, good news, we don't have to cut costs. We actually are going gangbusters, and the summer is almost booked. So I think that we were perfectly positioned in this and in RVs to see demand shift to vacation rentals and alternative forms of travel. And I just said the dreaded word. I want to get this out. It is no longer alternative when it's preferred. It is beyond any question at this point that staying in a short-term rental is now the preferred way of travel, and hotels have better figure that out.
But at this moment in time, it's that won't necessarily be long lasting.
Oh, I think it will. I think that the space that is afforded in short-term rentals, the ability to take your family with you on business trips, I think people have found it. There is always going to be a use case for hotels. I personally stay in a hotel anytime I'm staying 1 or 2 nights. I don't want to actually go to the grocery store. But if I just came back from a business trip to Destin, Florida. I took my wife and my youngest son with me. We had a great time. We stayed 3 days. We wouldn't have stayed in a hotel.
So let's talk about Sonder. Sonder announced that they're going the SPAC route. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to ask you your take on that space. And also, I mean, everything seemed a little convenient to me. In all due respect, when Francis Davidson was speaking, he said, people are dying to go back to cities, which have been suffering during the pandemic. I'm not sure that's true or not. And he said that, I think he said 80% of Sonder's business is leisure. Well, I thought the whole value proposition for Sonder was professionalization, and it's a place where, you know, business travelers could go and the standards would be met. So what's your take on that space?
I felt like that the right things happened at the beginning of the year. I think that Sonder standing alone at this point in that business model is probably best positioned as it's ever been, as well positioned to succeed as it's ever been. I personally have always questioned that space. I think it's very hard to do any business based on arbitrage. Francis mentioned that they were going to be building some buildings, and maybe they're going to be a REIT, and God knows what they're going to be. But I tell you, there's never been a $2 billion valued corporate travel company. So I'm kind of interested to see and watch how Francis and his team moves it forward. The valuation is very rich. It almost feels like I'm back in 2001 before the first .com bust, when, you know, pets.com got valued at billions of dollars. So I'm not a big fan of the business model. I am a fan of urban travel in vacation rentals and short-term rentals. Not sure what Sonder brings to the party that other people can't bring individually or in professionally managed properties.
Maybe we should call it the quasi-hotel bubble.
Possibly. I tell you, I think he is. One thing I do agree with, I think, is that people will travel back to cities. It's going to happen. This is not forever. I know that from in my other life, I'm on the board of Hostel World, which is, you know, suffering as well as like all hotels are suffering. And we know that when people can travel cross country in Europe, the travel rebounds quickly. So I think people will go to cities. They're going to have a lot of opportunities to stay in lots of different places, and hotels are probably going to be driving their rates down for the short term. I haven't paid more than a couple $100 for a hotel, you know, in great locations in the last year, and I'm not sure what's going to happen in 2021, the rest of 2021, that's going to change those hotel rates up. So that is a little bit of a headwind.
So the audience and I are on the same page. We both had a question about what you see in terms of consolidation coming up. And I note that in the session before us, Vered was talking about how she doesn't see the booking channels acquiring property management companies. I think Airbnb acquired one a couple of years ago. Where do you see consolidation happening in the space?
You know, I have no clairvoyance. I'm friends with both Brian Chesky at Airbnb and Jeff Hurst at Verbo, and Glenn Fogel. So I'm not going to try to offend any of them, but I believe that all of them would fail miserably if they tried to be a professional property manager. It's hard. The easy part is what Homeaway started, what Verbo is continuing, what Airbnb is doing, and what Booking's doing. That's the easy part. When you have to change a sheet, that's hard. And the professional managers are best suited for doing that. Consolidation within that category, I think, is going to continue. So I think there will be further consolidation of, I don't think Vacasa has acquired its last company. I believe they will keep looking at that. I know Vacasa has had its eyes on Europe for a long time. Europe may take a little longer before you start acquiring things, but there are already mega property managers across Europe. You've got Interhome, Interchalet, you've got the Yo-Yo Group now, and others that represent 25 and 30,000 houses. Those are very big businesses that are very complex. I don't think Jeff Hurst has any desire to actually figure out how to change a sheet in 30,000 properties.
Right. So we do have an audience poll. Which platforms do you feel have the best supply mix and approach to short-term rentals? Expedia, Verbo, 65%, and Airbnb and Booking.com, fairly even, around 30%, 31%. Which brings up a question. So how do you view Airbnb's articulated strategy to lean into individual hosts as opposed to the property management companies where they get the lion's share of their booking? Are they really doing that? And what do you see as the upside or downside to that?
I don't think they're really doing that.
So it's rhetoric or what?
No, I think that there is a disconnect between the real ideology that Brian Chesky brought into this industry. He brought a business based on an ideology that people need to travel and meet other people and learn about living in different countries. And I mean, the young Brian Chesky was just a joy to talk to. And he was talking about individual hosts back then. Behind the scenes, and we knew it at Homeaway, they weren't talking to individual hosts. They were trying to sell property managers all day long. But it didn't go with their ethos. It didn't go with the vibe of their television ads to say, oh, when you get to this house, you're going to check in with a property manager. I think they do have an opportunity now. And I think that the opportunity, I'm hoping that Expedia, Verbo doesn't let them exploit this opportunity. But 60% of the vacation rental industry or more, it could be as much as 75%, are still homes represented by individual owners. Those individual owners no longer have the advantage that they had on Verbo back when we formed it. That is a group of people that if Airbnb wanted to create, and they have homes everywhere, they have homes in vacation markets, which is the reason Verbo exceeded all expectations is its homes are in the right place. Brian Chesky's homes were in the wrong place. It's kind of that simple. So Airbnb can get those properties, and they'll have to adapt to do it. The other thing that Airbnb is going to have to understand is that it's just not set up for professional property managers. Maybe for the ones who grew up on Airbnb and who were able to speak the Airbnb lingo. But if you're a professional property manager with 1,000 properties under management on the Outer Banks of North Carolina, you have to use your operating systems. You have to use your check-in system. You have to use your billing system and your trust accounting methodology. And you need to integrate with all that, which is something that during the early years of Homeaway, we set our sights on specifically to say that we do not want property managers to have to change their business one iota. We just want them to distribute through us and be able to book, but they're booking on their own platforms because they have to.
So Brian is also talking about adding millions of new hosts in the coming years. Is that realistic?
I think it is realistic, honestly. The reality of how he does it is going to be interesting, and I'm not sure he'll be able. My wife just came through, but at any rate, I think how he does it's going to be is where the rubber is going to meet the road. There are millions of homeowners who have properties that they like to use themselves. These are second homes that they like to use themselves. They don't want to rent them 52 weeks a year. A property manager, to make money, likes to have a home with all its availability. So if I have a home at South Padre Island in Texas that I like to go to 6 of the 12 weeks of summer, and I only want to sell the additional 6 weeks. That was the traditional customer that started VRBO in 1995. That's who it was.
Mm-hmm.
That customer is still out there. That owner is still out there. And he bears a far more relationship. He is far more like the Airbnb host than he is a Verbo professional property manager. So I believe Chesky does have that opportunity. I also think VRBO can keep that inventory if they return their focus to helping that person sell their 6 weeks.
Yep. So do you think, though, that investors are downplaying the regulatory headwinds? I mean, where you live in South Padre Island, Texas, I mean, can you rent your second home freely, or, are more?
Yeah. In South Padre Island, you can. In vacation rental markets, you really can. I heard Hurst talk about that earlier. The regulatory issues are less pronounced in traditional vacation rental markets, but they are. It is picking up steam. At the Florida meeting last week I attended, I was shocked to see people leave the room when the folks came on to talk about regulatory issues in Florida, because Florida is seeing assaults on the rights of homeowners to rent their properties in vacation markets. It's like the most counterintuitive thing in the world. If you don't have vacation travelers coming to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, because it's illegal, what is Fort Lauderdale going to do to replace that revenue that comes into its city every year? Mm-hmm. San Diego, the same thing. I'm seeing this in vacation markets. And to my mind, the greatest threat to the short-term rental industry is this looking the other way as regulations come in to stifle the rights of homeowners to rent their properties.
What do you mean by looking the other way?
I don't think that they're focused on it. I know that I know they have lobbyists, and I know that they're looking at this, but there are large issues that need to be solved. And fundamentally, the issue is, does a homeowner have the right to use their property in the way they see fit? That has not been the focus of regulation. It needs to be, in my mind. In my mind, we need to litigate that and establish once and for all that we can do it. And then you can have cities begin to regulate it more appropriately, instead of, you just can't do it. Of course you can do it. It's your property. You can do that. So I think that if we can get our the major property managers around the world, every individual owner who makes money renting their property, need to be supporting the effort to get appropriate regulations for short-term rentals, or it will stifle the growth of the industry.
Switching gears, admit it, aren't you starting to feel a little sorry for Google? I mean, they have the Google vacation rentals, Booking.com, Airbnb, Verbo, none of them are in it. So are we about to see Google's first major failure in travel?
I have learned a long time ago never to bet against Google. I think that it is something that they are having to think very long and hard about. The largest advertiser on Google is Booking.com. It has been for years. Now, you're going to really honestly compete against your largest advertiser. Maybe you think you can make that up in the margins, but you're having to perfect every business model in the world. I've always thought the headwind on Google is just how many business models do they think that they can actually lead? If there's no question Airbnb and Verbo lead in the short-term rental industry as far as understanding the needs and wants of the guest. There's a lot of other things out there for Google to focus on. Whether or not they're going to pull back completely, I don't know. They've never had a revolt of the top 3 people before. They do now. In any of their categories. So we'll have to watch it, but I would never bet against Google. I think Carl, too many smart people trying to figure out how to compete.
Carl, we could talk about this for a long time. Let me get in some audience questions. Given your experience with hostel world, what would you say to the hostel brands that are still in survival mode? Do you see them as becoming more of an alternative to STRs as travel returns? What would be the signs of shared accommodation is starting to bloom?
Well, I can share that in hostel world, when markets have opened in Europe, we have seen demand for those locations soar because people want to travel. The core audience of a hostel is that 18 to 25 to 30 group. It gets older when it's guys going for football weekends versus young people backpacking. But that market does come back. I think that you'd have to bifurcate that question between Europe and the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. There's just not enough hostels in the United States right now, and we need more because it is a preferred way of traveling amongst a segment of travelers. And that's what's keeping demand in the United States down, is there's just simply not enough inventory. In Europe, there's too much inventory, and we just need to get the countries back open. I expect to see, my personal prognosis is that hostels will recover before hotels in Europe.
So another audience question, and Wouter from Skift Research reported earlier that the major platforms have actually gained market share during the pandemic. As a group, and yet a lot of individual owners are talking about pushing direct bookings. So the question is, as more STR owners focus on social media for direct bookings, do you think there's an opportunity for Verbo or Airbnb to incorporate social travel media platforms into their apps?
That's a perennial question. I think if you ask Brian Chesky, he'd say he's already a social media platform. He's introducing people, and he focuses totally on community. Every time, you'd have to really ask Jeff Hurst and Glenn Fogel that question, because they have the most current data. When I was running Homeaway along with Brian, I would be able to tell you that every time we looked at social stuff, it didn't work. Because you just don't have enough friends to rent your property. You need more than that. We bought a company while I was at Homeaway that was exclusively focused on social media marketing. It was a great little company. It couldn't grow. So no, I don't think it's a huge component. I think the thing that Verbo is focusing on now, which is reviewing travelers, and to trying to get that better, is more in just helping commerce go. It's not social.
Yep. Well, I mean, we saw TripAdvisor recently try to incorporate travel inspiration and social media, and they stepped back from it. Let's see. Could Google Vacation Rentals lead to a direct booking boom, as some tech companies are getting them the rates and availability?
I don't think so, honestly. I think that homeowners are now, this is no longer the early days. We have established mores and we have established leaders. What Verbo and is old habits die hard. What Verbo, Airbnb, and Booking.com do for this group of travelers now that is growing exponentially. You heard the last guest talk about 20% of the travelers hadn't ever stayed in a vacation rental before, which I find extraordinary. When I formed Homeaway with Brian, only 4% of U.S. travelers even knew what a vacation rental was. That was in 2004. It's now 80% of people understand what they are. So I guess that getting an individual booking for an individual home is everyone's dream, but it's unlikely. I think you need to be on the major platforms. And I also think people need to understand that this myth that Airbnb is cheaper than Verbo is for owners and hosts is insane, because if you can get 15% more for your property on Verbo, which you can because it has the demand, then you're actually selling cheap on Airbnb. The price parity is very important. I think that's one of the things you mentioned in an earlier segment today about all these extra costs that bother people that come up. Owners want guests, and the best way to get those guests, in my opinion, if you're an individual host, is through Airbnb, Verbo, not so much Booking.com.
So one more audience question, then we'll wrap it up. Would you consider RV or glamping cabins an alternative, or in your opinion, has that gone more mainstream too?
I think RV definitely went more mainstream in the United States this year. That has not been a trend that was echoed in Europe. Honestly, it really took off in the U.S. I don't know. I've got friends in the glamping industry. I've got a friend that developed a whole tent that he sells that is amazing. I won't plug him here because he may not be able to take the volume, but I think that may be a trend. Personally, I think we have to get to 2022. I want to see us exiting 2022 before we really start talking about what trends are permanent from the pandemic. This is all just still making it up as we go along. And RVs benefited like crazy. RV share and outdoorsy benefited like crazy during the pandemic. When there's not a pandemic, how many parents really do want to spend 2 weeks with their kid in an RV, 3 kids in an RV? I think we'll find that
Torture.
You
Okay,
come
really
back with
quick.
only 1 kid. That's what happens. You leave with 3, you come home with 1.
Oh no! One more audience question, then we'll wrap. You touched on this already. So we see the different models with fees by the OTAs. Booking doesn't have a guest fee. Airbnb does. So what do you think will happen with OTA fees?
I think everybody has their different market, how they like to market themselves, but we all, at the end of the day, look at take rate. What can we take from this property? Whether you take your 15% from the traveler and a traveler fee, or your 15% from the owner as a charge, it's still 15%, dude. It's still coming out of what it is. And as long as the homeowner is able to get out of the property what they want, then they are fine with it. I think the rest of it is just, 3-card money, or what is that game when they move the ball? If you hide the ball, it's all the same rate. My long-term question is whether or not, and in 2022, I think the answer is still going to be yes. I think we can increase rates in vacation rental in the short-term rental industry. Everything tells you should be able to do that. You have restricted supply. You have incredible demand. Owners should be increasing rates like crazy. Property managers should be increasing rates like crazy. And whether we can maintain that step up in rates if we do get a flood of supply, which I frankly don't think we're going to get a flood of supply, but if we take those rates up, that's what supply and demand tells you to do right now.
Maybe all that discounting was just a pandemic hangover. So let's see what happens. Anyway, Carl, we got to wrap it up. It's been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dennis, for having me, and good luck to those of you out there to come out of the pandemic.